Well, I'm here to talk to you guys today a little bit more on the kind of design side standards and more of a broader viewpoint of usability within the emergency and ICU spaces. So, as Jan said, I'm Sarah Patak. I'm the president and CEO of Canyon. To give you a short little introduction on Canyon and kind of why we're qualified to speak on this topic. So I'm in Salt Lake, Utah, so it's morning for me here, but we're 3 locations across the United States. We specialize in contract testing and consulting within the medical device and pharmaceutical space. Specifically, we work in microbiology, analytical chemistry, biocompatibility, and packaging testing. And then on the consulting side, we specialize in sterilization, packaging engineering, toxicology, and regulatory and quality. Commonly within our packaging engineering space, as well as kind of design engineering space, we're working with a lot of medical device companies to tackle questions and compliance around usability. And that's both for your IEC 62366-1 standard, so more of your device side usability, as well as your packaging usability, more under your ISO 11607 section 7. So we cover kind of two sides of the coin. We'll talk a little bit about some of our inputs and what we've seen specifically within the kind of emergency space within human factors. But just to give you a little bit about us, that's kind of the whole breadth of services that we cover. We have, in this specific topic, myself has about 20 years of experience of working within the usability space. And then we've really worked with thousands and thousands of projects across not only the US, but the entire globe. And then we have a little over 100 experts on staff that cover both human factors and that packaging design side. So we'll dive into it. So I wanted to start with kind of why this matters. You know, when we get a lot of this all kind of started with our team when we were designing packages for hospitals, and really, you know, we were looking at, you know, when they have plenty of time to open the package and when, you know, everything is clearly labeled and it's in a much more relaxed environment. And we found that, you know, there's a lot of devices that have not only, you know, say ambulance application, but also ER, and then maybe also just your regular clinician type space. And those environments were spanning, you know, very different use cases. And so within that, you know, we started to dive into, you know, why does this matter? Why do certain devices and packages need to be designed more towards the emergency space versus, you know, the more calm clinical usage? And what we found, you know, you've heard this from most of the speakers today, but we found it's high stress, it's time compressed, information can be dense on labeling, and you know, you're often understaffed in the ER space. So you're working with limited resources. Maybe not everyone has worked together before, and you know, you're trying to deal with these very high emotion, high stress cases that, you know, maybe you're not taking the time to read the labeling or open the package in the most aseptic way possible. And that really just created the environment that stressed the need to design packaging and devices to be used in this way. So, you know, looking at the users that are using these devices and packages, typically speaking, they're fatigued. Jens talked about that with traveling to his patient very, very early. You know, he's maybe had a very long day. Maybe he had a, you know, 15-hour shift that he's coming off of, and there's one more emergency patient, and that, you know, is an incredibly important case. So he stays, you know, the extra time, but in that he's fatigued, he's wearing PPE, he might be operating with, you know, other nurses or technicians that don't have that amount of training that he's used to. He's being interrupted. He has a bunch of different cases happening at once. You know, there's a lot of what we call small usability flaws that can become this huge patient safety risk. And, you know, when you talk about usability from a testing perspective, typically speaking, we're looking at a intuitiveness of interacting with the package and device, and we're looking at, your ability to aseptically present that device properly. And when you're testing for that usability, most commonly, you're doing it in a comm environment. So to bring in the ER-like environment to that usability test case adds, a whole nother layer or factor to that testing. So some of kind of the other elements we've seen affecting the workspace in general, over the last decade, we've seen this massive push towards smaller and smarter and more portable devices, especially within the ambulance space. You're working in, this tiny box and you don't have a lot of space to maneuver. And with that, device companies are trying to make things modern and more compact, just kind of like you're seeing in this example in the pictures. They went from, big box to tiny little phone application. There's a lot within the miniaturization space that is very helpful of saving space and being able to, maybe put more devices within the ambulance environment. But there's a lot that also makes it really, really difficult. You had this old machine that has big numbers. It's, very easily labeled. There's green and red to tell you, natural intuitiveness, how to start and stop the piece of equipment. Now going to this modern compact device example, yes, it's a lot more, faster to deploy. It's quick to work with. It has that tiny element to it, but it also creates smaller screens, harder to read text. It, reduces maybe the interface that user had before. It leads to more errors potentially of clicking the wrong thing. And so that miniaturization is something that, while has a lot of benefits, is something we've been watching a lot from a human factors challenges perspective. I think this miniaturization has happened because devices are increasingly moving, as we said. They're bedside to transport, hospital to outpatient, hospital to home. We have a lot of different applications on that side. So now that this trend is happening within devices, we need to ensure that our human factors and usability testing and design inputs still remain at the forefront as well. So designing under cognitive load, we talked a lot about, the fatigue, having PPE on, maybe working with a lot of people that you haven't worked with before. This is something that we're seeing is not considered in the standards. So when you're just looking at standards, you might not necessarily be addressing that humans don't perform optimally under stress. And so within that, considering design inputs that make it, again, more intuitive, but also, put shields to error in there. Don't make it so that you can just continually go forward without a check system within the device that you're using. But, usability is not necessarily about convenience. It's fundamentally about safety and reliability, and we need to have that under degraded human performance. So really what we're looking at and what we see most commonly within human factors that studies that fail in this environment is people are misreading displays. So you can kind of see that in our graphic here, under that cognitive stress, maybe she can't tell which one of those is the main, data point that she should be looking at. She might accidentally click the wrong button. We talked about, red and green indicators as far as intuitive design. If you don't have that, or it's a touch screen, she might have selected the wrong option. We talk a little bit about alarm confusion. I also want to highlight there's also a lot of just alarm desensitization. In the ER environments, you already have all this loud noise, you already have all this chaos. There's alarms going off everywhere. And we've noticed a lot in device design, if the device does not consider that it is in the room or in the ambulance with a lot of other devices and they don't have connectivity to each other, it could just be another alarm bell ringing that, it gets lost in the noise because everything's chiming in that moment. So we've worked a lot with some device companies to either create a complete interconnectivity network so that it can prioritize alarms. And I do think, if we talk innovation, this is where the AI space could come into this market. If we can create devices that can intuitively figure out what is the most important alarm to notify the technician about or doctor about, that is, a way that we could amplify decision making and speed up decision making. But until that happens, it can get lost in the noise. Connector misalignment is another one we see in incorrect setup sequences. Again, you're doing things fast, and if it's not intuitive, we see people miss it. Typically speaking, what we recommend and the design inputs we're giving for individuals that are designing a device for this space is, it's colors and symbols, and you can even make sure that they don't connect at all. There's two devices we work on in kind of the suction space. And if you misconnect a piece of it, it alarms, and there's a piece that you'd really have to shove in there, and it would not connect if you were forcing it. And that is so that they do not create a negative situation of where the suction goes not into the right container. So, they thought about it from a design perspective that if someone's, setting this up very quick, they can't do it wrong, or it doesn't allow them to move forward, or the, interface system with the device tells them that this is a no-go, you have something set up wrong. But again, keep it intuitive. If you can do red to red, yellow to yellow, green to green, it makes it very easy for folks to quickly interact with those devices. So like I said, a lot of the real world failure modes that we see are those tubing connectors causing misconnections. The alarm fatigue is one we covered. One that we didn't talk about was touchscreens. As things get smarter and more modern, touchscreens are becoming a lot more common over hard buttons. And there's two kind of factors we see most commonly affecting the touchscreen side. It's fluids, whether that be rain in the ambulance environment, or even fluids from a patient or an environment. And then gloves are the second most common issue that we've seen with touchscreens. I think ensuring that the touchscreen that you bring into your device considers both of these factors and has PPE pieces to it to where it does interact with the screen is vitally important. We've also found with gloves that even if the screen is interactable with gloves, perhaps the glove is not quite as tight as you might like, and with that the finger doesn't necessarily hit exactly where they want. So we've worked with companies to adjust the level of error or the exactness that the screen requires. Maybe you broaden that a bit so that it truly does need to be, where the person is trying to click and they can't misclick on that screen. Hidden menu layers, slowing emergency actions. This is another one. I think everyone has the best intentions when they create a deep navigation screen to give lots of features to their clients. But when time is critical, this often, if it is not a 3-option module that can take place in less than 2 seconds, it's becoming a hindrance to the ER environment. So typically speaking, we're advising clients to consider potentially 2 platforms, whether it's a clinical use environment that might have a much lengthier menu option versus a ER ICU ambulance module that really should be the most bare bones within the features of the menu. Status indicators, we see this a lot of times where, it's unclear or there's inconsistent status cues. I always use the check engine light thing. That is something that everyone's very familiar with, but then there's all these different icons on your dashboard and you might not know what they mean, and you end up, searching it on your phone. And I think that happens a lot in the medical device space as well, where there's certain icons that are very intuitive, but other ones that might look like something else or could be misinterpreted. The other thing we see a lot is you have different icons that might be commonly seen across different, regions of the world. So ensuring that it either is words that are very easily interpreted, it is a red, yellow, green of good, bad, or okay, and that it is a universal symbol if you are truly meaning it to be that way. Battery and power confusion during transport. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of folks in the ambulatory space that they end up running out of battery on something when they go get deployed to an event that, isn't in the actual vehicle. They're out in the field. And within that, they have unexpected shutdowns, and now they've completely lost usage of that device. So two factors is ensuring that you have ample battery power and ample battery length. Typically speaking, we hear a lot of feedback about having quick interchangeable battery options. Don't make it a plug and charge. Make it more of a, external removable battery that you can charge and replace. That way, if something dies, you can, bring in a replacement without having to wait for a charge. And then we also just, hear a lot on the battery side in sterile environments. Sterilization and batteries don't really go hand in hand very well. So ensuring that the battery can be removed is also very helpful for the sterilization and re-sterilization space. Training is another one that we talked about. I think the answer we get from a lot of doctors we work with is, oh, well, we'll just amp up the training that we give with our device, or our sales reps will make sure that the end user knows how to use the device. And it's really a dangerous assumption. We're seeing that a lot of devices, although maybe they are meant to be paired with a sales rep of every time of use, that's not necessarily always happening. I think the reality of acute care is that turnover can be high. You have floating nurses that may be unfamiliar with the environment. Emergencies remove time from reference materials, and then travel staff is another one we've noticed a lot. I talked a little bit about, maybe the doctor isn't familiar with the technicians that are working with them within the ER, and we've found that more and more common with traveling nurses being a trend within the healthcare environment. And with that, again, you have a team that wasn't trained together. Maybe you have someone that was trained under AORN standards, and you have someone else that was trained under, something completely different. I think one big piece, we've done a lot of research on kind of how nurses learn to interact, at least with packages in the medical device space, and we've learned that while there is formal training, most commonly, and we interviewed about 250 nurses across the United States, and within that, we had a 72% response rate of, I learned my aseptic opening technique from my manager, from the person who trained me, which means that it's not necessarily standardized. It's very tribal knowledge. And with that, you have just a wide breadth of how people are learning to aseptically present and interact with packages. So with that, until we maybe have more universal training programs within the medical realm, especially to do with aseptic opening of packages, I think you need to account in your design that there could be multiple ways to interact with your package or your device or your use case, and you need to consider, how do I optimize success across all of those different case options? So what does it look like in practice? When we're taking on validations, like I said, we typically in the past were doing more of your formal validation strategy, which was relaxed environment. It was, nurses and doctors related to the device sector, say like ophthalmology. We got people that knew about and worked in ophthalmology instead of getting someone that's, maybe general practice, but doesn't have an ophthalmology focus interacting with an ophthalmology device. So we're trying to create more worst case scenarios during validation. So potentially not, formal trained nurse on the topic. We're doing simulated stress environments. We're working in low lights. We're really making sure we have full PPE protection to the ultimate hindrance of the user. And then we're even going to the extent in devices that are specifically designed for transport and emergency workflows. We are testing them in those environments within a validation. So really looking to stress it to the worst case possible and the most common use case as well. Just kind of stating on the importance, usability is a clinical safety requirement. The better usability, the better patient outcomes. At the end of the day, from a packaging perspective and an aseptic opening perspective, we're trying to reduce the amount of hospital-acquired infections that happen because of bacteria contamination on device, hands, or packaging. So the more we can do to make this human-centered design so that it's easier to work with, more intuitive to work with, and allows less opportunity for error, the better safety, better care, and better patient outcomes we can derive. So key takeaways. I think the main one is, humans are not optimal under stress. So design for that. Think about the cognitive burden that they're under, and don't ask your design experts to think about things in the ideal scenario. Think about them at a fatigued scenario. Usability failures are common, but they're also very costly. I'm seeing more and more, especially FDA feedback on the usability side. So it's very important to think about usability, design for usability, and then test and prove your usability as well. Intuitive design is essential. I hit on this multiple times of the more you can make it, really hard to mess up, the better it is, and the less, really calculated thinking someone needs to interact with the device, the less opportunity for error there is. Human factors engineering, again, drives patient outcomes. We want to improve the success that clinicians have in the end use environment. And then lastly, validate in the real world. We've seen a lot of people that only validate in a lab, or they only validate in, a controlled environment. I stress you guys to get out there and try it in the real world. Okay. Questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate your patient-centered and user-centered approach, and I think you will truly shape the future of testing and consulting in MedTech in general. Thank you so much. So there's a question from Eric. At which stage of development should you be involved? As early as the core functionality representation, or only during product design?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I always say the sooner you can think about usability, the better. I can't tell you how many folks get all the way to prototype, or they're getting into manufacturing and they go, darn it, it would have been really cool if we would have changed the colors of these connectors. And now they've delayed their launch and possibly cost themselves millions of dollars of retooling and refixing the device. So truly the earlier, the better. I think bringing in usability questions at each stage is very important. So continually asking, ask frequently, ask early.
Thank you. Another question, do you take the learnings from the aviation industry to the medical field? Train the problem away attitude has led to multiple accidents.
So I would kind of want to ask you some of this, Jens, too, because in aviation, when something goes wrong, they're meant to go to their checklist and they go through their checklist, and that's meant to take the emotion out of the situation. I think, yes, we derive that from how we think about how people work through these devices, but I also think that what we're looking at in the human factors perspective is considering the chaos in the mind that might be occurring because of the emotional brevity of what is happening. Jens, on your side, do you see, when you have an emergency, are you going through a checklist in your head? Do you think others do that?
In my head, I'm going through a checklist, and I think also others are doing this. But there are some SOPs, standard operating procedures, but it's not standardized as it could or as it should be, I think.
Yeah, and I think the ambiguity in training that I was talking about, no one in the ER is whipping out a checklist and going, okay, like here we go. I'm going through, my steps, and in aviation they very much do that. They're bringing out a notebook. So I think the chaos of the environment might yield that not being the case. But I do think it is a good way to look at the environment.
Absolutely. In the operating room, it's becoming, or in anesthesia, it's becoming more popular. But in emergency medicine, I think there's still a lot of work to do. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. So another question, could you envision an AI-assisted learning distribution method? This is currently considered by companies in the energy sector to consolidate their training from multi-site operators towards a centrally curated methodology.
I think 100%. I think AI will affect both the device distribution side of things and how devices, especially IFUs. I see IFUs being interactive AI tools in the future, not being these lovely paper booklets that nobody reads within the device. So, and then, also on the decision-making side within the ER, it should be heavily AI assisted. If it can get you 80% of the way where the last 20 is human interaction, I think that's a huge benefit of accelerating outcomes.
Thank you. Oh, we have such an outstanding audience, so many questions. Roland is asking, on top of the challenges mentioned there, are also different roles, for example, if ultrasound is being compared to the US, I'm sorry, if the US is being compared to the EU, that's an extra challenge for companies crossing the borders.
There is. So when you're looking at usability standards, it's generally harmonized between US and EU, but there are additional factors to think about within the EU. One thing I always like to mention with the EU is that sustainability is also a higher importance factor on not only validation and submission, but also in just how the market wants to see devices and packaging. And that sustainability also heavily affects the usability of packages because typically they're designed, with maybe less materials or less extra labeling. And so within that factors, there's extra things to consider to ensure that you don't lose the intuitiveness as you reduce, say, packaging size as well.
Thank you. Patrick is asking, did you notice a shift in what intuitive means influenced by what happened around smartphones? E.g., did you notice that, for example, solutions like MagSafe are more requested? Did UX design change?
Yes, we're seeing more and more of smartphones and just more technology being added into intuitive nature. It's no longer just yellow meets yellow. How can a device tell you what you should actually be doing instead of having just these intuitive color matches or things of that nature. So yes, I think you're going to see that more and more and more. I'm curious how the regulations will incorporate that as well.
Thank you, Sarah. So Marie is saying your presentation covered everything in usability. It's very informative. Thank you.
Well, I'm
And I
happy
think
to, answer any other questions that anyone has via email, and my phone are there. And then I shared this presentation with the group, so I believe it should be distributed out after.
thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity.